Balrogs probably had no wings, but perhaps they could still fly. Hey everyone, this is James from Growing Books. Thanks a lot to all of you who keep coming to this channel. We are so close to reaching the 3,000 subscribers mark. So thanks a lot to all those who like, comment and subscribe to this channel. Now, let's talk about Balrogs. Can they fly and do they have wings? This is probably one of the hottest Tolkien debates out there. But first things first, what are Balrogs? According to Tolkien's mythology, Balrogs were part of the race known as Maiar, who were corrupted by the first Dark Lord Morgoth during the creation of Arda, or the world. Known also as the Valaraukar, these spirits or demons of terror assumed a man-like shape covered in shadow and fire, whilst using swords and whips as their main weapons. Now, there are two notable Balrogs mentioned in Tolkien's mythology, and those are Gothmog, the Lord of Balrogs as mentioned in The Lord of the Rings, and what is known as Durin's Bane, the same Balrog that Gandalf battled against in the Fellowship of the Ring. And it is actually this part in The Lord of the Rings, specifically the 5th chapter in the Fellowship of the Ring, entitled The Bridge of Khazad-Dum, that has been causing a heated debate among Tolkien readers. In this chapter, we are introduced for the first time and given a physical description of Gandalf's enemy, the Balrog, as it shows itself before the fleeing fellowship in the mines of Moria. And two particular references are given to the appearance of the Balrog, and two particular references to the Balrog's appearance are put forward as argument both for and against the concept of the Balrog having wings. The first being, his enemy halted again, facing him, and the shadow about it reached out like two vast wings. A few paragraphs later, Gandalf confronts his enemy head-on, and we read, "Suddenly it drew itself up to a great height, and its wings were spread from wall to wall." Is it merely a simile, a symbolic reference, or definitive proof that the Balrog indeed had wings? The shadow about it reached out like two vast wings. The word that throws off any kind of argument for the actual presence of wings is the word like. If Tolkien were to conclusively assure his readers that the wings of the Balrog were indeed physical, he would have omitted that word. Simple. But by its inclusion, he personifies the shadow and assimilates to it a shape, emerging from behind the Balrog's back. No trouble there. We can easily interpret this as the Balrog having no wings, except for a cloud of shadow that extends outwards, as if they were wings to the eyes of the beholder. And that seems to settle the debate for good. Balrogs have no wings. Now, years back, I was a staunch believer in Balrogs actually having wings. But as the years passed, I found myself reading and rereading The Lord of the Rings, specifically this passage in the book, and it became clearer and clearer to me that these wings were most probably just symbolical. And we also know that the Balrog's primary characteristic is that of fire and shadow. Earlier on, Tolkien described it as a great shadow in the middle of which was a dark form, of man shape maybe, yet greater. What I failed to do the first time around was to put this second reference in context to the first. His enemy halted again, facing him, and the shadow about it reached out like two vast wings. Suddenly it drew itself up to a great height, and its wings were spread from wall to wall. It seemed evident now that the wings that are said to be spread from wall to wall was but the shadow that cloaks the Balrog. That had to be the only explanation, and other than that, it could be said that the Balrog has no physical wings. Now, readers in favor of the wings argument put forth other references to help sustain their theories. Take this quote, for instance, from a Silmarillion draft. "Swiftly they arose, and they passed with winged speed over Hithlum, and they came to Lamoth as a tempest of fire. Winged speed is very suggestive of flight and the ability to travel in haste over long distances. This is further supported by a note in The Lord of the Rings appendices that recounts the presence of the Balrog in the mines of Moria. Thus they roused from sleep a thing of terror that flying from Tangarodrim had lain hidden at the foundations of the earth since the coming of the host of the West, a Balrog of Morgoth. Flying again seems to reinforce the idea that Balrogs had physical wings. But then again, one must remember that the language and the style in which Tolkien wrote his stories might not appear as originally intended. Several times in the Silmarillion and The Lord of the Rings, he ascribes characters, elf, man, dwarf, orc, with this attribute, most notably as fleeing away or running towards something with great speed. The word itself therefore cannot be taken too literally sometimes. It ultimately all depends on the context. But a further argument in favor of the wings theory is put forward in an obscure quote. With Gandalf's apparent fall, the Fellowship finds itself attacked by a band of orcs and a flying creature, which Legolas manages to shoot down, until Gimli the dwarf speaks up to praise the skills of the elf. That was a mighty shot in the dark, my friend. But who can say what it hit? Said Legolas. I cannot, said Gimli, but I am glad that his shadow came no nearer. I liked it not at all. Too much it reminded me of the shadow in Moria, the shadow of the Balrog. He ended in a whisper. It was not a Balrog, said Frodo. Some people argue that Gimli's comparison of the flying creature to the Balrog is clear evidence that the latter indeed had wings. Why would something unknown that had the power of flight remind you of another creature unless it too could also fly? So they claim. But again, the context within which this passage needs to be examined is important. Gimli compares the flying creature to the Balrog, not because of the presence of wings, but rather that of its shadow. The shadow which was such an important characteristic in Tolkien's writings. Once again, the argument seems to shift towards the no wings theory. And yet the debate continues and subjectivity plays an important role, as every individual reader can come up with their own theories in favor or against the argument. But here's another theory. Could the Balrog have had no physical wings but still had the ability to fly? Let us remember that the Balrogs are from the race of the Maiar, these divine spirits who existed before the creation of the world, or even the universe. And as Tolkien writes, thus it came to pass that of the Ainur some abode still with Ilúvatar, beyond the confines of the world. But others, and among them many of the greatest and most fair, took the leave of Ilúvatar and descended into it. This, of course, might be a case of looking too much into things, but is it too much to think that these divine beings who descended into the world could not indeed travel by flight if need be? And what of Gandalf, Saruman, Radagast? They are all part of the Maiar race. But let us remember that the Istari, or the Order of Wizards, although divine beings, they were bound by the constraints of the mortal or physical bodies when they came over into Middle-earth as wise old men. But it wouldn't be totally inconceivable that the demons of terror, who we know could achieve great speed of travel, had the ability to travel vast distances by a similar characteristic to flight. What do you guys think of this? Agree, disagree? Let the debate continue in the comments below. So that's all for today. I hope you enjoyed this video. As always, like, comment and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Cheers!